Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mythgard Movie Club. We're talking about a fun little movie. I say little, but it actually was longer than I remembered. It's over 2 hours, which I don't think I had realized, because I think most of the times I've seen this is like when it's on like TBS or something, and there's like always commercials and stuff, so you don't really get the full sense of like how long it actually is. But yeah, it was a little longer than I remembered it being. But The Fifth Element. So yeah, we're excited to talk about this. It's a fun film. We'll see how deep it is, or how deep we all think it is once we get into it. But I think it's definitely has some stuff that's worth talking about. So thank you for joining us. Before we get into the movie, though, let's talk through some announcements. So this weekend, just in 2 short days, is Baymoot out in California. Still. You can still sign up. You may have missed the boat if there are lunch options. You might be stuck with whatever is left over, but you can certainly register still. If you go out to the Mythgard or the Signum website, go to signumuniversity.org/events, and you can get the registration link there. And then coming up soon soonish in February, in like 3 months, soon for TextMoot, because they always have their stuff planned way out ahead. Is TextMoot in Houston this year at the Houston Baptist University. Registration is not available yet. We're getting close to being able to open that up, but you can, if you're planning to go, submit a presentation or panel or paper idea. The CFP is open, so textmoot.org, you can get all the details there. And then, of course, we just sent out the email for this, although registration's been open a couple of weeks now. Our classes for the spring semester is coming up with a new class on classical myths and legends. Some good stuff there. We're also rerunning Corey's Lewis and Tolkien course, which was real fun. I took that many years ago now. I think we can say it was like 7 years ago. I think he first offered it, and then his Modern Fantasy 2 class, which does not require you to have taken Modern Fantasy 1, and of course Intro to Germanic Philology 2, which does require you to have taken the first one of that. So if you're interested in any of those, check out our classes page, our future classes page on the Signum University website, and check that out.
So just want to make sure everybody knows that our next movie club is going to be on December 19th. We're going to talk about Solaris, specifically the 1972, I think, version by Andrei Tarkovsky. So I can't say if we're saving the best for last, because I haven't actually seen this movie yet. But I suspect we might be saving the hardest for last, for whatever that's worth.
Right, maybe.
I think this is going to be a dense movie, so give yourself some time if you're interested to track it down and check it out, and put some thought into it. And we hope to see you back for that on December 19th.
All right. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Did I? Okay.
Nope.
Just want to make sure we introduce ourselves, and actually in the meantime, just a reminder for attendees, please be sure to put in questions and comments into the chat box, and we will keep an eye on that. So I'll go first. My name is Kat. I, with Curtis, run the Mythgard Movie Club, and we also host the podcast Kat and Kurt's TV Review. And I also volunteer for Signum as the academic coordinator. Brenton, would you like to go next after you sip your tea?
Yes. Excellent. Thank you. I am primarily a C.S. Lewis researcher. I look at spirituality and theology in the way that people build their fictional universes, and that's mostly what I do. And I just completed a PhD in that area, and I teach at Signum University and a couple of other schools, trying to bring those things together. And I write a bit more popular level blog at pilgriminarnia.com. So, and which has nothing to do with our topic tonight, any of it. But,
You never know. C.S. Lewis comes up in a lot of stuff.
Well, yeah, that's right. Well, usually in my classes when I'm teaching C.S. Lewis, I sort of put a timer on before J.R.R. Tolkien is brought up in the discussion. So it's, I think we've gotten all of 40 minutes into a class before that happens. But yeah, so but yeah, of course I'm a fan of all kinds of things, and so I'm here as a sheer just kind of enjoy this film, right? That's all.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go next. So my name's Dave Maddock. I'm a Signum alum. I just finished up my master's at Signum, focusing on lexomics work in Old English poetry. So love that experience. My day job actually is as a software engineer. And geez, I think this is my third or fourth Mythgard Movie Club. So I'm excited to be back.
Yeah. Good.
And I'm Curtis. As Kat mentioned, we co-host the movie club, and we have a podcast. I am a digital marketer by trade and do some outreach stuff for Signum in the off hours, I guess. Yeah, looking forward to talking to this. So this film has been definitely one of my favorites for a while, just in terms of sheer fun. It's one of those that, as I mentioned, I always sort of stop and see it when it's on TV. So it's kind of, well, maybe we can get in. Maybe this is a good place to start talking. I feel like it's kind of one of those that it's good to have on in the background while you're doing chores, like you're washing the windows or sweeping the floor or something. Be that as it may, I've always sort of enjoyed it. Thought it was a fun little film, so I'm excited to talk about it. And of course, I'm always excited to talk about sci-fi in any format.
Devora in the questions is backing you up. She's saying that of the movies we picked for this year, she has been looking forward to this one. So
yeah.
I think there's a lot of, and I got some really nice, like, hashtag iconic, comments like that or whatever when I shared on Facebook. So I think there's a lot of affection for this movie.
And I think like we even got a few on Facebook, a few mentions of people saying they were disappointed they wouldn't be able to be here for this one. So it is kind of funny. In reading up on kind of the critic views and reviews and stuff, it does seem to be fairly divisive. Like there are a lot of people who sort of dismiss it as just kind of whatever, and there are a lot of people who seem to really like it. Not necessarily saying it's the best movie ever. It's just that they enjoy it and that too. Although I think there's certainly a lot to talk, enough to talk about that we can bring forward. So I wanted to point. So the film, of course, is based on a story by Luc Besson and directed by him. And he co-wrote it, starting from what I understand when he was a teenager, a story idea he kind of had, which may tell you more about the story than anything else. But, what I wanted to kind of start out with here, and we can not have to spend a ton of time on this slide, was just kind of point to some of the maybe common themes that Besson likes to explore in his work, which is the sort of badass female coming in to save the day or kill the person or whatever the situation might entail. And I don't think I had realized he had done Nikita, which is often referred to as La Femme Nikita. I knew he had done Leon, which isn't really about a female assassin. It's about a young female learning to become an assassin, kind of, in a way. But all these other films, I had seen Lucy, of course, Fifth Element, just ran on. Came across a really interesting quote, or a really apt quote, I should say, from John Couture, who was sort of reviewing The Fifth Element, reviewing Anna, which is Besson's most recent film in this genre, I guess, or whatever you want to call it. It says, "Stop me if you've heard this one before. An unassuming young female projects a timid front, but is really a sharp killing machine in sheep's clothing." which I just kind of laughed at. I'm like, yeah, that kind of fits for all of these, doesn't it? But I did want to sort of bring up, there is, whether we want to talk about it now or kind of talk about it later, there is a fair amount of academic criticism on the film and its portrayal of women, not in a necessarily positive light. And Besson himself has been, in recent years, as kind of a part of the Me Too movement, accused of quite a few women coming out and accusing him of inappropriate behavior of various kinds. So, whether or not that translates into the film or not, I don't know, but it at least wanted to sort of acknowledge that up front, and we can, if we want to talk about any of that as we go through, just wanted to bring that up. All right. Has anyone seen any of these other films?
Besson definitely has a type, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's often the same actress.
It is, right.
Yeah, there are.
So that's something I was definitely going to mention, not as something that I think putting them all in a row like this is probably the most indicting kind of way of looking at it. When you kind of realize this is not only does he consistently work in a genre, but it very much is a subgenre of his own particular style. Like, he is a kind of subgenre unto himself in a way. And I'm sure there's exceptions. Devorah's mentioning in the questions Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, which is more recent, which I actually reference on a different slide, which I don't know that it entirely bucks the trend, but it at least is a little bit more of a two-hander. The focus isn't quite so much on the single female, I don't know, magic dream girl or whatever you want to call her. So maybe sure. That one, there might be a couple that are a little more outside of this trend, but yeah. And so I think the ones that I have the most affection for, I think, are The Fifth Element and Leon. They're probably the ones that I saw at a younger, impressionable age that, I just enjoyed and got a lot of, I don't know, pleasure out of or something. And it's the more recent ones have been more apt to sort of try my patience, but I think that's more a function of when I met them. And you mentioned that it's often the same actress. For me, I feel like the actress has a lot to do with the success of his whole vision here. We can talk about Milla Jovovich, or Jovovich, however you say it. I think I actually really like her performance in this, which I think helps me overcome some of the more stereotypical or objectifying aspects of her character. And a lot of times with these kinds of roles, I think that in the hands of a lesser performer, the tropes become a little more glaring. And when you have somebody who's, very complex and doing a lot of different things, that can kind of mask it a little bit. So for better and for worse.
Yeah, and I just to point out, he did do other films. Like this isn't his entire oeuvre. He actually started out with a number of indie films which have been sort of lumped into this cinema du look, which I have a slide on later, movement. He's also produced. He's like considered the most famous or successful French director, and he's been a producer on a ton of other things too, including like movies like Taken and all the Takens, and like various other like Transporter and like lots of these sort of high energy, action adventure kind of films. So Yeah, I don't mean to imply at all that this is like the summation of his work, but certainly is something that he has a clear interest in this sort of genre, or type, I guess. I don't. I said genre a couple times. That's probably the wrong word, because I mean these are kind of different stories or different approaches, but certainly from a characterization, I think there's a lot of similarity for the leads in these films.
I think the word profile might work pretty well.
Yeah, there you go.
It has a nice double meaning in this kind of case. So I actually saw The Messenger was what I saw right after. So like, I mean, it came out 4 or 5 years after or whatever. And it actually reshaped the way I watched Fifth Element, you know, because
really?
I didn't really know what to do with The Messenger. As someone who's a religious studies historian, it was a bit of a weird film to watch, you know, and with the bold subtitle, The Story of Joan of Arc, right? You know, like, but I think it could be read basically as a, you know, like a late medieval interpretation of Fifth Element. I think, you know, I think that's probably I think that's probably a fair. But even like Lucy, you know, like the name of our kind of the named ancestor that we have in whatever museum, Chicago or something, and you know, like Angela, you know, like this kind of primal Eve Christ prophetic image that kind of runs through the whole thing is a bit interesting. So quite apart from the fact that Lucy is the female version of his name. So
there you go.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's a good point. And I think the other thing, besides how I think Milla Jovovich just like is very adept at this kind of role and serves as a really good muse for him. I think the other thing that kind of undercuts some of the stereotypes is that, especially with the Fifth Element and probably The Messenger too, you really, for me, I just get the sense that I'm working, the language of this movie is very much symbolic, and especially looking at some of the things I did in prep for this, it's hard to kind of even critique it in terms of representation of human characters, because I'm pretty convinced that he's working almost entirely with symbols rather than like psychological characters. Now we can argue as to how successful his symbols are, or how deep they are, but when we're talking about the perfection, I feel like it's less about the idealized human woman and more about a symbol of perfection itself, and on a more spiritual or symbolic or mystical kind of plane. And that plays into feminine aspects, but it's not necessarily talking about, you know, an individual human woman per se. So
sure. Well, and he does play with that a little bit, because like there's several times where the assumption is this perfect being is a man, and then it's, you know, revealed to be a woman, in fact.
Yes, pretty sure. I think the nude figure confirms that like fairly quickly, actually. So what's interesting, you know, like the feminist critique, you know, the feminist critique phrase, you know, the male gaze of the camera lens, right? You know, and then what I find intriguing about his work, I don't know that it works to just kind of lump it in one sort of anti or pro camp, but you definitely have the male gaze of the camera lens, but you have the female gazing back in a very kind of intent way in most of his films, right? And so even some of these covers, right? You know, The Messenger and Lucy there. So yeah, and I wonder if if Milla was, you know, like I wonder if she was kind of amping up, like Scarlett Johansson's become sort of the surprising superstar female actor in speculative fiction on screen of this last decade, really, and doing some super interesting stuff. I wonder if, and maybe Bruce Willis of the 1990s, that's a surprise, right? You know, one of the male act leads of speculative fiction. I wonder if Milla Jovovich was in that same trajectory, and I wonder if Messenger kind of pulled that off. So
Hmm.
Of course, there's the whole
Right,
like,
and she had the whole Resident Evil
yeah,
series,
Yeah.
and definitely I think at least for a while, if not
yeah,
still, she had the
yeah. She
kind
had
of
that.
geeks version of the kind of pinup. She was definitely like a favorite
Yeah,
action heroine of kind of genre movies of the, at least of the late 90s and early 2000s, if not even still today. So,
well, she looks good in thermal restraints or whatever it was called, thermal bandages, right? And
right.
but she has a lot of pathos with her acting, right? You know, very facially focused, and yeah, it's funny. I can never remember the name of Resident Evil. I saw it in Japan as Biohazard, Biohazard. You know, so anyway, that was quite a franchise.
Well, she's a good action star, which again, I think for me contributes to a lot of why some of these work maybe a little bit better than they have any right to, is that she is genuinely convincing as, the kick-ass action heroine.
Yeah,
And sometimes people, especially I think women, are hired for action roles when that isn't necessarily their strong suit. And I think she is one of those actors who has both. Like she has um, all the kind of model beauty that you want, but she also can physically, um, she has a lot of skills and is very convincing in her action scenes.
yeah.
Um, which I just think helps some of these movies get away with it a little more than some of the others.
It works really well if you actually watch Messenger thinking of it as a spec fic film rather than historical fiction or hagiography or something, right? You know, like that's actually a good genre distinction. I think that works
Mm-hmm.
pretty well. So anyway, yeah, no,
Very weird.
yeah, yeah, no, she actually has I think the best action sequence in this film, not the Bruce Willis stuff with the guns, but I think her Matrix learning of
Yeah.
I know kung fu, you know, once
Mm-hmm.
like this version of it works pretty well on film, I think so. And they all have guns and no one thinks a shooter. It's sort of this weird, a really weird scene. So yeah, it's cool.
Well, and I mean, it's funny that you bring up the Matrix because this preceded that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So like, yeah, but
Right.
but
She's
it, I
even
mean,
got the little like come hither kind of
right,
hand
that's
gesture
right.
and
right.
everything. Yeah.
You definitely you think of that as being the Matrix, but this was before that. This is
Yeah.
her doing her thing first. Um, yeah, cool. Well, wow, you said more about that slide than I thought we were gonna.
Strong slide.
Here we go.
So I again, like we can just start here. I wanted to just kind of start off talking big themes because like this is definitely one of those where I don't know that there's a lot of subtlety. It's like boom, big evil fiery ball of fire
Well,
just
With
appears.
with a skull coming out of it
Yeah,
in case
yeah,
you missed
exactly.
that it is death. Yeah.
Like if you didn't know what the bad guy was in this movie, like you really weren't paying attention.
yeah. He's actually a motorcyclist out of like
Yeah.
northern New York, right? So
Um,
they use this same shot for the Token biopic, I think, the war scene there. So
oh, there you go.
The flamethrower. Yeah.
Very well may have. Yeah.
That's true. But the funniest thing though about the the big evil ball of evil is that, at least for me, for most of the movie, I forget that it even exists. Like it's the
Yeah.
most forgettable ultimate evil of all time, I think. Like you see it a little bit at the beginning, maybe once or twice there's a cursory shot just to remind us that it exists, but it's almost besides the point.
yeah, and it's funny. I rewatched the film this evening as I was sitting on my desk, but I'm skipping ahead like the 10-second ahead button, 20-second ahead button. And these ones I'm just going skip, 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 skip. Like to me it's almost inconsequential. Like it's just the big bad. It's almost like the the monster of the week, even though it's 1,200 miles wide, or whatever. It's just, I think it's a mythic fail as far as the film goes. It's just the other side. What's intriguing is the rumored sequel was called Mr. Shadow, right? Which is the voice from the midst of the flame, I guess. Is that what we're supposed to think? Who's the guy that called? Did I miss this? Who's the guy that?
The voice that talks to Zorg on the phone, right? When he starts like bleeding brown blood or whatever from his head, which is one of the
so weird and campy. But then there's no wound. Like he wipes it away, and it's just like it's fine. He's fine.
No, and because that's so weird and random. That's one of my favorite little touches of because like that's something very small and quirky and completely unexplained, which kind of makes it a little bit more interesting than just evil ball of evil.
Well, I may be misremembering the order, like the sequence of events here, but doesn't it like takes in all the communication satellites, right? And then it calls like the impression I get is that it like has to get all these communication satellites so it can call Zorg. Like that's the only reason it's doing that. They're like, why is it sucking up every satellite in the known universe? Oh, so it can make a phone call. That's
and not just Zorg, of course, but Jean-Baptiste Emmanuel Zorg, right? And just so we're clear. But
it's just because it's that big Zorg building,
That's right. Well, but there's all these gaps in the film. Right, like the match at the end, and like I don't smoke anymore, and he smoked all through the film, Rudy, and this is one of them. Like, so he sucks in all the satellites, makes the phone call, but like Zorg was already doing his evil bidding to destroy the universe for cash, So like, did that come by fax?
Well,
like,
I don't know. So right, like Zorg is a weapons dealer, so like I think the implication there is that he's already like Mr. Evil, right? Like he's already like doing. It's so hard because like we don't have, like we just know that this evil appears every 5,000 years or so, and you've got what's his name there at the beginning going, oh, so I've got some time then, do I?
Luc Perry.
Luc Perry, thank you. I don't know why I couldn't think of his name. But
Luc Perry.
Yeah, like this idea of just like, oh, it's just this evil that appears every 5,000 years. Yeah. And you're just sort of left to say, okay, like that it's just a thing that happens and we don't know why. And presumably one of these appearances in the past, like I know I'm jumping way ahead to the end, but like, is that where the first moon came from as well? Like, is that the implication that like that was another big ball of evil that almost hit us and got averted at the last minute?
Yeah, Stonehenge was built as the first circle to, like 5,000 years ago. That's what Stonehenge is.
Oh, maybe.
Sure. I think I like just kind of on this theme, but kind of stepping back across the whole movie. I've seen this movie. I'm like you, Curtis. Every time I bump into this on TV, I get stuck. And so I've seen it, I'm not sure how many times, and I watched it twice in the last week. And I still feel like I really don't know what's going on in this movie in terms of the actual, not so much the plot, but the mythology. Like I had to actively push myself to pay attention to dialogue in this movie in a way that normally I think we're all literary people more than we are even visual people. So I think everybody here is more sensitive to dialogue than anything. And you have to kind of train yourself to look at images. Whereas with this movie, I just feel like for me, it's the complete opposite. We could talk probably for most of our time about the images. And I feel like I had to really force myself to say, all right, what are they talking about? Like, what are the details of what's happening right now? What exactly is the mythology? Like, what is the evil? How long is it? And I understand that it's simple. I don't disagree that the evil shadow is complex. But even the dialogue that is there is, again, I think kind of like you're saying, a little beside the point. It's more, I think, I would argue, I think this movie is more about the images and less about the specific mechanics of exactly what is happening, and what they have to stop and why.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with all of that, Kat, and I'd say, like, I think I get the impression through the whole film that Luc is like really conflicted, even himself, about what the mythology is. Like, I feel like he really wants to make like a social political film. You know, like, come on, the real bad guy obviously is Zorg, right? The evil industrial war machine.
But he gets blown up 2/3 of the way into the movie.
Of course, because
like, he doesn't even make it like to the last bit.
Yeah, I know. This is getting to my point, right? Like, I think he can't decide. Am I making this film? Am I making like this grand mythology film? Like, and there's this weird juxtaposition where, at least for me, like, I get the impression that I can't take either of those evils seriously, right? Like, the ball of evil obviously is not important, and it's not the main driver of the bad things that happen in the movie. But then you got this other guy who he's kind of an afterthought. He's not as big as like the big evil who we don't care about. But then he, like you said, he dies early, and he doesn't really interact with all our protagonists very much, and so on. And it all seems it has the effect of making it hard to really buy into any of these evils as credible threats or real problems.
And that's something that didn't.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Brenton.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Kat. Yeah.
Sorry, I think I stepped over what you said. So repeat yourself.
No, he just he let the priest go. I don't worry too much about Zorg. To me, he's like the Willy Wonka evil genius.
Oh man, imagine how many kids would get hurt in his factory tour.
That's right. You should see what I can do with bubble gum. Just
right. Jeez.
Sorry, Kat, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna repeat what, kind of reiterate what Dave said about it didn't strike me until this one how separate Zorg is from the main story. Like, he interacts with the third level bad guys, his kind of alien minion guys that that he's doing the deals with and ordering them around. And he has the one scene with Cornelius, the priest, and he has his phone call with the evil ball, and that's it. Like, that's his only interaction with the story, full stop. So I think I saw someone say, like, oh, it's funny that the main villain and the main hero don't, share any screen time. It's like, not only does he not share the screen with Bruce Willis, he doesn't share the screen with like 80% of the entire rest of the movie, which is just a very strange choice. That makes me wonder why. Like, that I have a spidey sense that there's a production reason, like that there's almost like, this is completely speculation. I have no basis on this, but that feels to me like a scheduling conflict or something, where like that it's just such a strange choice to not only not have him share screen time with the main characters, but really not interact with them much at all, even in terms of plot mechanics.
Of course, he is a werewolf, so maybe he only could. No, that's a later character, right? Sorry, I got mixed up there. I thought Gary Oldman did brilliantly in this, and then I heard rumors. I don't know if this is true because he and I hardly talk anymore. But like, I just heard that he hated doing the film. Like, he was just And I
read that somewhere as well. Yeah.
He was in Leon the Professional, and then he wanted he was trying to get his directorial debut financed, and the deal was for Luc Besson, you will produce my movie if I appear in this movie. And I guess he's not, I don't know what his thoughts are on the film in general, but at least his own performance, he's not thrilled with, which I can see why, but I completely disagree with him. I don't blame him for feeling that way, but I think he's wrong. I think he's really entertaining.
Yeah, no, he's good. He's good.
Whereas Bruce Willis seemed to love making this movie, which
Oh yeah.
I wonder why. Yeah, but no, no, I had read that as well, that Gary Oldman didn't really enjoy or like this experience much, and may not think much about the film itself.
But look, this is like a go big or go home kind of situation.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, you got to do your big tent movie to finance your passion projects, right?
I guess, like, I don't know. I think you could almost see Bruce Willis sort of smiling behind his role when he was doing this film. It was an unusual, like, we're going to get, 12 Monkeys, not a lot of kind of smiling behind that role, and then, I See Dead People. Like, he has these super intense roles. And in this one, like at one point, the girl falls into his cab, he saves her, gets kicked out of the priest's house, and he's lying on his bed dreaming about this girl with a boyish smile on his face while he's talking to his boss, who's Zorg ultimately, who wrecked his cab and now he's out of life. It's just such a funny, it's just such a weird role for him. I love it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's always, you're right, he's had these like really serious roles, but I feel like he's always had like the tongue-in-cheek side too. Like he had his whole Friends, appearances where he's like, kind of mocking his own Die Hard stuff in there and that kind of thing. So I feel like, and I mean,
and what was
if there's something else, sorry, I was just gonna say, if there's something else that rescues this film besides the visuals, it's the humor. Like, it's just the quirky, weird humor of it all, and I agree totally that he's like, you can tell he's kind of grinning behind the mask in a lot of, well, sometimes actually grinning on screen as well. But like, like at one point the priest even calls him Mr. Willis, and he goes Dallas, and he goes, Mr. Dallas. Like, I don't know if that was like impromptu and they just left it in, or if that was actually scripted or what. But like, either way, it's funny. Like, if they intentionally did that, it's funny, and if it was just a mistake, it's funny. Like, that they just kind of did it. So stuff like that, I think, is really great.
Yeah.
In this.
Yeah, and I was trying to think of Moonlighting, which was his kind of where he got his role. Like, he has this kind of rom-com, tongue-in-cheek comedy, kind of comedy, drama, romance, action. That's like his, the kind of mixture of those elements are, I feel like I'm going to keep saying that. That's like kind of where he lives. Like, that's his
all five of them.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's
elements of Bruce Willis.
Those are the four, and he's the fifth. He's the thing that pulls them all together. And it's like, it's not dissimilar to Die Hard, right? Like, the mixture of, like, there's a romance, there's some comedy, there's some action, there's some drama.
Sure.
Like, this is, I think, where he's comfortable. And I agree that he's having a lot of fun in this movie.
And Christmas, right? It's a Christmas film.
It is.
I'm looking forward to Die Hard 21, Die Super Duper Hard.
Well, I think one of Bruce's specialties is the movie where he just has a really bad day. Like, I feel like he's made that movie so many times, and this fits into that. Like this, and actually, maybe it's a good time to switch to the next slide, because because it's very Bruce centered, and like I kind of feel like half of this movie is just Bruce Willis having a really bad day, which is what he does in like every film, and it's great. The scene with the crazy tweaker guy with the gun is hilarious.
It's a lucky day, right? Remember he says
so weird.
Lucky day? No, lucky day.
Yeah.
When he's like, I lost my job, I smashed my cab. I think of Dumb and Dumber right here, right? Our pets' heads are falling off. I'm expecting him to come out with that, right? Man, it's so funny. And the phone conversations with his mother are the best.
The president.
You had a different title for this slide, and it was a quote from the mother, wasn't it? Something about. It was who calls him like the nastiest dirtbag in the city or something? Yeah,
I listened for it in the film. So I saw that in a script that I found online, which was not like the finished script. And I was listening for it. I was actively like going back and trying to listen to all, because like when you're just watching the movie, you're not paying attention to what the mother says. Like other than maybe every 10th word. But like I was actually trying to like hear everything she was saying to him, and I couldn't actually hear that line, so I wanted to switch it out with something else. But I thought this was pretty good too. This is the army guy who comes to recruit him says this to him when he's like, look, he's like trying to compliment him, like, oh, looks like you settled into a wonderful life. This is a nice apartment you have here. The little like hallway with, you know, ultra compact living arrangements there.
Mm-hmm.
Although the wall that falls down and then your drive up Chinese restaurant, like
that's pretty cool.
That's like there are like when Leeloo, sorry, I got Milla in my head. Leeloo, when she steps out onto the ledge and sees the city, like that's like, you know, that, you know, sure, it's not as technically good as like that, you know, the terrible Star Wars version, you know, a few years later, but you know, it's cool, like, and it's light and bright, and there are these sort of, and what's really interesting is my son was watching it with me for the first time, and he says, oh, they took all this like 90s technology and they left it in the future, and I'm like, no, they actually went back to 80s technology, like, and they moved that 80s kind of pop culture tech for, like, I expected Max Headroom to show up, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Right. And it's like a bit mirror shade-ish, but it's all bright, and you know, it takes, so that's all moved forward. So I thought that was kind of a cool, like, it was a cool design feature. I know we were talking about something else, but I just thought of the apartment, and it's a terrible apartment.
No, that fits in really well, at least with kind of what I was thinking about for this slide, because I did want to talk about, like, I mean, a decent portion of the first half or so of the movie is this is New York City. I think it does say that at some point. Although I didn't remember that until I was like researching it. I'm like, oh, it takes place in New York. But there's the quote here I have from Susan Hayward: if there is a Luc Besson scholar, it's her. I'm not sure she quite would want to be known as that, but like I found several articles, academic articles by her. And in this one article, she's talking about not just in The Fifth Element, but kind of in sci-fi generally, this idea of the city body, like the city as a body, as a character in film, and particularly sci-fi sort of dystopian films. And kind of what you were saying there, Brenton, about there really is so I had never thought of this until I read her paper, but that moment where you have the Chinese, you know, vendor coming up to the window there, that's got to be a callback to Blade Runner, right? Like to the film Blade Runner, where you know he goes and is, you know, there's Chinese food and he's, you know, they're eating it and whatever, and this idea that like you have these massively tall, you know, skyscrapers with like you can see in there like with like fire escapes. Like who's gonna, you know, walk down there? But it's this idea that there's this city that kind of grew organically out of the older technology and still has kind of this real mix of, you know, new like huge, you know, McDonald's, you know, digital signs and stuff, but then like rusty old, you know, fire escapes hanging off the side probably because of a city regulation that like they never, you know, got rid of, right? like every building has to have a fire escape, even though they're practical. There's no practical use.
That's right.
You know, on a skyscraper that's 8,000 stories high or whatever.
It's like William Gibson meets J.G. Ballard, but with like the design people from Back to the Future too, right? You know what I mean? Like it's just like we're gonna talk about design. We're gonna talk about design later. It's much more like a graphic novel on screen than it is those other films like Blade Runner, you know. And they share, of course, the parent, like this. There's a lot of Star Wars homage in this film, but again, like starting. Well, and starting, that was perfect. That was gorgeous. And then, but starting in the desert, and you know, like, you know, all the all the rest, and that kind of mythic, serious stuff you get in Star Wars kind of lightens up. But yeah, no, it is. And then you get the Ballard stuff by being like an endless city, right? This is like, it's infinitely tall, it's infinitely wide, but it's still South
That's
Brooklyn.
Neuromancer too, right? The sprawl.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And another thing it reminded me of, which is later, is the Doctor Who episode Gridlock with the very tall, and it's endless rows of cars that are stacked, hover cars, flying cars, but are stacked kind of this high, and
it's like an endless commute, basically.
Endless commute, and literally like they just go in circles forever. But I remember, well, two things. Russell Davies, who wrote that episode, said that for him, he wanted to try to do something cinematic because for him, cinema is vertical and TV is horizontal. So to make it cinematic, you have to go up and down. So there's a lot of like climbing down the layers of cars in that episode. And that, I think they specifically called, they didn't call out The Fifth Element, but they called out Judge Dredd, the comics, as an influence, the design of the city. So it kind of occurred to me I know there was comics influence on this movie, and probably Judge Dredd and a lot of those 80s sci-fi and cyberpunk kind of comics have a lot to do with the look of this. I mean, that screenshot you have there is very Blade Runner, other than like the color palette. Like, it's not particularly noirish. It's not nighttime and raining. But other than that, I mean, the endless kind of grimy city and that big gaudy neon billboard is very Blade Runner.
So Deborah has two comments here. One, she says, this is the future of DoorDash, of just kind of the endless, I guess, I'm not sure exactly what she was referring to, but maybe the drive up right to your window.
Chinese food to your window,
and then
I love he has like a little boat that he kind of, it like is like this hover boat that he sails off into the thing.
I think I took that image out, but I did have a picture of that, like the hanging there in the middle of the city at one point. And then she also mentions the cop car saying NYPD, which I believe that's right. Which is another thing that I believe Susan Hayward brought up in her comment about, again, like the taxis are yellow. It's yellow taxi, right? Like, this isn't some future where like kind of that idea. I mean, Kat, you were saying like how this film, or someone was saying about how this film, is really just a film of symbols. And like, it's funny how those symbols just over time, 300 years in the future, we're still using the same color yellow for our taxis. Like, that's kind of an interesting idea. Whereas like, I feel like a lot of times when we're going into the far or kind of far future of stories like that, there's a interest in getting away from. It's like how much will things change? Whereas this is more, in a lot of ways, like, how much are things staying the same, at least in terms of that sort of symbolism and carrying through.
Look at the McDonald's logo, unchanged.
Same
300 years into the future. So yeah, I think that is very consistent across.
What else could it be? But I
can't improve on perfection.
Yeah,
I mean, it's also product placement, but yeah.
And it's a little sexier in the future, I have to say. But it's actually kind of smart. You say it's not film noir, but it's film orange, right? And sort of orange is the new black kind of like pop culture moment. But what's super interesting is that what do we have here that we didn't have in 1914? I mean, it's true, interstellar travel, but like all the models are kind of the same, right? Moving pictures is still, becomes little screens, and telephones. Like, there's still all these archaic looking phones all the way through. But today, what do we have that we didn't have in 1914? Like, largely, like the digital technology, but largely the symbols in our home are much the same as they were 100 years ago. They're just more efficient and better and things like that, and brighter and different palettes and stuff. So that's kind of an intriguing thing to throw that forward. Like, the last great inventions come, before World War I is a kind of an intriguing, idea in a space race, a world, right? It's kind of a cool, it, and works with the time. Nothing. There's this 5,000 year cycle. There's not really a forward motion. It's just change until the time comes again. Time is nothing, or time is.
Time doesn't matter. Is that?
Yeah, time doesn't matter. Just life.
Only life.
Yeah, the would-be mugger there too. I love like the combination of high tech and lo-fi. Like he's just got a screen on his head that he puts down. It's just a printed out, or a painted on picture of the wall behind him. Like it's not even that detailed or whatever. And it's just a great combination. I feel like those sorts of details.
It's Max Headroom. It's Back to the Future too. It's just such a cool.
Yeah.
And there are so many little throwaway details in this movie.
There's kind
of things that just don't serve a purpose. They're just there for the world building and the texture to make you feel like that he just put something interesting in every little corner.
Yeah. Speaking of which, so I did want to point out too that this is before CGI really takes off, right? Because it's like Star Wars that a couple years later and The Matrix that are kind of that forefront of CGI. I don't think they're really using they might have tweaked a few things here, but I remember back watching this originally 22 years ago or whatever it was, and seeing the whole when they're 3D printing Leeloo and being like, oh, that's so cool, but now it's we have 3D printing. There's it's kind of like that, but not really. And it's it just doesn't look as cool or whatever as it is. But there is I think generally a lot of the graphics do hold up because of there's this mix. And the New York City here, they made a 1/24th scale, which is still pretty big, of these huge buildings, and then overlaid it with the CGI cop cars and that kind of thing, or all the cars, I'm sure, are CGI. None of those cars are actually flying. Just in case you weren't aware of that. But the amount of detail that goes in that kind of thing, and kind of adds that little bit of realism. They said it took the really long time to make the windows in all those buildings. That was the particularly difficult part of it.
Yeah, and he was smart enough to do it as practically as he could. That's what really holds up, is that most of the alien effects and the models, as you're saying, and as much of the special effects as possible, they did with real materials, which stops it from looking entirely goofy. And where it is goofy, it embraces the goofiness. And so you can't critique it, because that's kind of the point of the whole thing.
Right.
And then Men in Black just basically plagiarizes the whole, whole approach, but with
the alien head kind of thing. Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about the comic book influence, which not surprising. It's because he hired comic book artists to help design a lot of stuff, and he was a teenager when he came up with the original story. I'm sure there was a lot of influence, like Kat was saying, on that at the beginning. I'm not sure whose slide this is, but
I put this slide in. And it's not something that I know really anything about. I know very little about comics and even less about French comics, but apparently bande dessinée is this tradition. Bande dessinée is that's true. There's not an accent over the final either. So that's this kind of French tradition of comics, and in particular Jean Giraud, who is known as Mobius, and Jean-Claude Mézeray, I'm gonna guess. These guys he hired as production designers. So their work was influential on him, and also they designed the look of the film. So I think if you look at, that's Mobius is in the kind of the cityscape on the bottom right, and the one on the top left is from a comic called Valerian and Laureline, which is the basis for one of Luc Besson's most recent movies, which was called Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets. So it's obviously something that has continued to influence him, and he specifically adapted. So yeah, and then just the articles I was reading was kind of pointing out, probably not terribly, it's pretty obvious to see that, you know, there's influences on other popular sci-fi and cyberpunk from, you know, the kind of mid-century to the current day. So Neuromancer and Mad Max, Alien, Blade Runner, Star Wars, and Mobius worked on Alien too. So there's a lot of overlap between these guys. But I mean, they're saying influenced Blade Runner, and I'm sure it did, but also, like, again, these are not very what we think of as Blade Runner in terms of Ridley Scott's vision of Blade Runner. Like the brightness of the colors, I think is what has more of an influence on the look of The Fifth Element and stops it from just looking like a Blade Runner rehash of a dystopian futuristic city.
Yeah, I would agree with that. When I think back to various sci-fi films, Fifth Element really stands out, I think, for that reason. Like the color palette's drastically different from anything else I can think of. And in a really gaudy way too, like that I guess works for the film, like because it kind of slots in it in a weird way that is kind of difficult to describe. Like a lot of sci-fi dystopian kind of world building, you get like kind of this grimy urban vibe, right? And you have that same vibe in The Fifth Element as well, but in like a totally different way. Like it's grimy but also shiny for somehow, you know, some like really gaudy colors but also grimy at the same time. It's unusual, but it works really well, and I think really gives the film a distinctive look.
Yeah.
Neither of these three shots are a great example of what I just described, but
but there's the contrast of this shot of New York on the top right, and this one of when you're pulled out and away, like, and can see the skyline and whatever. This is when the transport's taken off to, you know, to go on their trip to the, what was it, Flotsam Paradise? Whatever.
Something I
yeah. Flotsam and Jetsam. Yeah.
That works for the water planet, but.
Right. Yeah, no, I like, yeah, maybe it's like when you get up close and you kind of see how dirty and grungy things are, but when you kind of pull back away, there's a little more, looks a little nicer, which is true to life a lot of times, right? Like if you're a little further away, maybe as things aren't as clear, you don't see all the sort of smudges and scrapes or whatever.
And they just keep building out of the shadow, right? You know, so they pollute like up to, I don't know, 50 feet, and so they just keep building above that. You know, and so he's able to hide down there. And there's a whole other, like, you know, where is 80s sci-fi, like urban sci-fi on film? It's like down in the mist, and we only are there for a couple of minutes while he's trying to escape. And if he had gone that way, you know, he probably would have found somebody, you know, to like transport data in her brain, or like to take him to Tokyo, or whatever, you know, whatever, you know, maybe some sort of biotech, you know what I mean? All that's in the film. It's just we didn't get it in this episode.
All the noir stories are happening on levels 100.
Right.
Well, all the orange stories are happening up on top, you know. So it's, but you know, there are some like cinematic, filmographic, I need a better word, you know, there are some lovely like picture moments in this film, and the stark use of color, like Fury Road. Mad Max Fury Road has these long kind of shots with this one striking image in it, or these contrasts, or these intense close-ups. And in this film, like, they don't go there. They, like, you know, it's a bunch of people making Lego and cartoons together with a big film budget, you know, and so it just didn't quite get there. It needs probably double the budget to pull it off, and another 10 or 20 years of technology. But there are moments where you can see the potential of that artistry, without losing the playfulness, without losing the campiness or the garishness or whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish, right? Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what you guys think of the quote that's on this slide. Patricia Ulmer talking about using symbols, you know, to turn capitalist ideology onto itself, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, do you think the filmmakers are trying to do that intentionally with this, or does it happen accidentally, or maybe it doesn't work at all? This occurred to me as well, and I'm curious what you guys think about it.
So to give a little background, so Luc Besson and a couple other French directors in like the 70s and early 80s, maybe even into the early 90s, actually, they've been identified as part of the cinema du look movement, genre. I don't know what to call it, really. It's not a lot of films that are kind of classed as this, and not a lot of directors. And Besson is kind of termed as one of the leaders of this, one of the leaders of like the 5 directors who are in the movement. But like, it's this very stylized form of filmmaking, and Nikita, which is like kind of his first really successful film, is sometimes kind of lumped into that. But this idea of the film having, or the director having more of a focus on the style and tone of the film rather than the storytelling. And kind of the way that, yeah, like maybe there's a connection here, but it's funny because
you describe this film pretty well.
in all of the commentary I've seen, they talk about how Leon, the professional, and then the Fifth Element especially get away from that, and he becomes, you know, Besson becomes the Hollywood of France, you know, the most Hollywood of French directors, or whatever. I forget exactly how they phrase it.
Right. More story driven than
yeah. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, going back, I mean, there is a narrative to this story. I don't know how. Like, there's plenty of holes and questions about it, and we've been talking about some of those, and we'll continue to do so. I'm assuming for another at least an hour or so. But like, I kind of feel like, I don't know, this might just be that sort of like this is the cinema de look on a big budget. Like, it feels to me like there's not as much disparity there. And so I can actually, I think I linked to this in our notes doc, but I didn't link to it. Maybe I'll add it to the link here before we upload the PDF for folks to look at. But in her paper, Patricia's kind of talking about how cinema du look was sort of dismissed. Like that's a derogatory term. It's not a term the directors gave to themselves. It's that, you're so focused on the spectacle of the film that you're missing any kind of story or anything. And Ulmer here is kind of saying, well, maybe they're doing something different and being more ironical or subversive, or however you want to put it, and kind of goes into that. Now, I don't really know enough, because I literally never heard of this type of film before researching for this movie or anything, and I certainly haven't seen any of the films that are supposed to be part of it, so I can't speak to it specifically. Maybe I'm making completely inaccurate assumptions, and maybe there's something really obvious about why Fifth Element doesn't fit into that. But that's kind of my take on it. And in terms of the capitalist stuff, like, how I don't know if Cinema du Look really is doing that. Maybe that's the reason why Fifth Element doesn't quite fit, because you have things like huge billboards with McDonald's on it, and how can you, be sort of take an anti-capitalist stance while at the same time, or critical capitalist, even if it's not anti-capitalist, stance, while you're also like getting lots of money from McDonald's for putting, their sign in your movie or not. I'm trying to think like what other obvious product placements there were, and I'm not coming up with any off the top of my head. The McDonald's one obviously is quite large. It's hard to miss. But yeah.
I think you make a good point about the potential hypocrisy of that. But I think one could make the argument that they're making fun of the consumerism and the sexualization of the marketing and so on. So like, while it's ostensibly a product placement, like it's also, like the hipster ironical making fun of the guy who's giving you the money, and thereby like justifies your acceptance of it because you can look down on them. Like I kind of feel like, I don't know if that's what they're doing or not, but I think you could certainly read it in that way.
Le hipster.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. Like we're gonna, I think, each end up kind of like teasing out meaning throughout this film. I think it's okay to admit, like, I don't know if there's any meaning in the film, right? Like, but I have to say, like, there's a lot of things I might think about when it comes to this film, like government or good versus evil or love or whatever mythology. But I guess I just, consumerism is just not really high on my list of the first things that or market-based capitalism is not, like I wasn't thinking about it as much. I don't know. Like to me, that seems like a weak jump. I'd want to see the deep read on this particular film and see what else is there. But I think there are stronger elements. However, the idea of visual versus story, I think, like the Cinema du Look sounds like a good description for me. Like that kind of works. And the reason I'm not sure that they're doing stuff exactly, but I'm going to suggest a little later something that's occurring on the film. I don't know if they're doing it because I don't know just how intentional they are. Like there's just, like
Sure.
He had like a 400-page script that he like pulled down to, to whatever a script will end up being, 60 to 80 pages, basically 100 pages, including, brief description. I don't know. And like when you look at the script, they've published the on-set script online, and then there's computer generated audio capture of what the film actually says. There's a lot of differences. Like there's a lot of strong interpretation. There's a bunch of stuff left out. There's a lot that happened in the shaping of this film. This was an active, live, moving organism, 5 minutes before it went into editing, right? So I wouldn't, yeah. Anyway, thanks though.
Yeah, and I should be clear that like Almer was not talking about the Fifth Element here. She was talking about the Cinema du Look movement in general. And so this is me kind of saying like, oh, maybe there's some stuff that's bleeding into Fifth Element, but certainly maybe it's not, and maybe that's the the success of the move of his own films leading up to this kind of naturally took him away from some of that too. If in fact Almer is right that that's what he was doing in the first place, which may not be the case. I mean, she's an academic making an argument, like she may or may not be right, as some of us sometimes are not right when we make our own arguments.
I just looked it up, and I've not seen any of the films on the Cinema du Look.
Yeah, I haven't either. So, and Deborah don't. So Deborah's mentioning that like she's not sure she even understands what the quote is saying. That might be on me because maybe it's probably hard pulling it out of context too, and my own not being entirely familiar. So that one's on me if I chose a bad quote there.
Well,
to try
yeah,
to get
and
across.
I mean, I can see if I think I understand it right, which I don't. I've read a little of read a little about this whole kind of situationist détournement idea. And I mean, I can see where you could see this film as a break from that, because other than the McDonald's product placement, it's not necessarily doing, as Brenton's saying, it doesn't seem to be doing what the description here has for détournement, which is very much this idea of, I think they called it like hijacking of ideas, like taking this kind of late capitalist ideology or iconography and reclaiming it and hijacking it and turning it against it to critique, what they see as the corrupt system. So I could see how one could say the Fifth Element isn't doing that. But on the other hand, I think you're right, Curtis, that like I don't know that it's entirely spectacle devoid of narrative, but like the two are like basically inseparable, which is I think what we keep going back to, is that the images, it's not spectacle versus story, it's like the story is in the spectacle. If you're not looking at the spectacle, you're missing where the story is. Like the story is there's not much story apart from when you look at the images and the spectacle of the thing. And that's where it sounds like it's at least in the tradition of cinema de look, even if it's a big Hollywood commercial blockbuster version of it, which maybe is a selling out of the values of cinema de look. It might not fully represent the kind of political aspects of that theory, but at least it seems like, I think you're right. Like it's kind of hard to read that first sentence about spectacle and not see that, this is very much a style over substance kind of movie.
Well, and so because I could see some, and again, like I'm not necessarily saying he has an anti-capitalist message or not. If there is one, it's in Zorg, right? like he's the clear, weapons man. I get the idea that like if he had fleshed it out more, it would be like a funnier future version of like the Nick Cage movie Lord of War or something, right? Like that very like that one's like, selling weapons in the Middle East and like there's just this big business of it. But this is like the ADHD, I just want to make fun things and blow them up version of that, and like didn't really have time to actually like flesh out any kind of message to it. I also saw commentary about like the environmental message of this film, and I'm like, where is that exactly? Like, I'm not sure I understand. Like there were a number of articles that talked about like the environmental message, in there. Not that it had a strong one necessarily, but that it was there. And I'm like, what, of a big fiery ball of evil that crashing in?
Right.
Is this a global warming
that recurs every 5,000 years? Yeah.
Yeah, like I wasn't clear on exactly what, and I don't like nobody specified precisely what the environmental message was. So like I was left kind of to guess.
I mean, other than just presenting the future as polluted and kind of grimy.
Yeah,
kind of seems like the only specific.
But just live on the top levels of the city and you're fine.
Right, and again, like that is seemingly divorced from the big bad, which is very much a spiritual evil rather than a something created by humankind, as far as we know.
So rather
than Mary Kondo, what's her name? The minimalist Kondo or Kondo Mary
Kondo.
Yeah. I think they could have used her in this future. It's
nothing sparks joy.
Yeah, to me, like it's kind of, and I this, Zorg. This is the backstory of Tony Stark, right? Like this is. Have I understood this like correctly?
Well, I think this is the projection of Tony Stark, right? Like it's if we let him continue.
A logical extreme of
That's
kind of,
right. Yeah. Rather than cinema to look, I think this is actually more like, I think it's like what, so 12 Monkeys is an adaptation of Le Jeté, which is essentially like a PowerPoint slideshow made film, right? And it's a film that's visually kind of rich, and it's trying to do much more philosophically than the whole can bear, and it kind of admits that. It's kind of the 12 Monkeys too. It's too heavy for the film, and 12 Monkeys has that same kind of like strange techno future, techno past combination that we have in this film. So I think it's more like that trying to use the visual to come up to the front of the storytelling. So it works there. It's certainly juxtaposing things. So that's there. Well, I don't know about the capitalist. I mean, it's like, this is a prophetic film, about, immigration and refugee pressures, in the Brexit, Trump, post-ISIS era. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting reading of the film. It's not very often a refugee falls into your taxi cab, but we got to figure out what to do then. Whether you're in sort of in Europe or in North America, but like generally, I think, I don't know, it's a film is a film. Like I think he makes films that do have messages, and the messages really come to the front in very obvious ways, right? So
I'm thinking of one of Corey's favorite quotes of it, there's nothing like looking if you want to find something. And I think he fills,
Sure.
I think his part of like the visual appeal is that he fills this movie with stuff and images. And it's like, you can have a lot of fun making that fit. And it doesn't mean that your reading doesn't work, but that's not the same as it was intended by the filmmaker, which isn't the end of the world. If it wasn't intended, doesn't mean it's not there. But
Yeah.
I mean,
No,
yeah.
I was just gonna say, I think there's a lot of like hints and allegations kind of in here, but like no, I don't know if any of them actually progress to the realm of message or like point.
I don't know. This
sort of way.
This film is like storyboard and set design with benefits, I think, and I think we should allow it to be playful in that way. I think that's okay.
Yeah, that's fair. All right. So I know Kat has been dying to talk about
the perfect
Yeah.
the alchemy of the fifth element.
Yeah. So this is my bit of meaning or symbol importance. Which again, I'm not denying that this is, the deepest understanding of alchemical imagery. I think this is very much a pop use of these symbols. It's not necessarily going into the depth that a lot of authors have used alchemical imagery, but there's enough of it here that I'm convinced, I'm gonna, like, if I was a betting person, I would say that Luc Besson had a book like this, the Dictionary of Alchemical Imagery, and that he went through it and threw stuff in. Because we have the title, The Fifth Element, which is the quintessence. It's the ether. It's, this kind of medieval understanding of another element that unites and perfects the other four. Which was associated with the Philosopher's Stone, the kind of object of the alchemical great work. And all this kind of dialogue with Leeloo about how she's perfect and she represents healing and she represents unity and love and, the ultimate weapon against evil is sort of consistent with that. And then we get all this recurrent chemical wedding imagery with Korben and Leeloo. The first time when he takes her to Cornelius's house, like he's carrying her in like a bride, and Cornelius is right there saying like, "Oh, the weddings are downstairs, and she's not my bride, she's my fair." And like that keeps recurring throughout. People mistake them for husband and wife, and at the end they end up in this. Well, I mean, their admission of love is, the thing that leads to the fifth element being released, which Chris Knowles, who wrote this blog, The Secret Sun, kind of points out that it's not Leeloo alone that's the fifth element. It's this conjunctio. It's this chemical wedding between Korben and Leeloo that leads to the defeat of evil at the end. And they end up in this kind of casket-like chamber at the end, which I have the medieval image there of the lovers in their casket. So you have this kind of death and rebirth imagery, which is pretty interesting, I think, given Zorg's whole destruction, life, and chaos speech. I think his understanding of it is not the same as Leeloo's understanding of death and rebirth, but at least it's playing on a similar theme. And in Lindy Abraham's dictionary, which I just pointed out, he says that the magistery of the whole work is that which has black feet, a white body, and a red head, which Leeloo has. And yeah, so,
feet?
well, her like black boots.
Oh, her boots. Oh, sure.
Her little combat boots. And
fair enough. Fair enough.
so, I mean, and I have a second alchemy slide too. There's a lot of like black, white, red imagery throughout, mostly with Ruby Rod here, who I couldn't get a good screen grab, but when he first appears on the TV in the beginning, he's got red hair, and then he's got white, and then he's got black. And his whole color palette is this kind of black, white, red, which are the kind of three big main stages of the alchemical work. And I was reading about Mercurius, who is the sort of central spirit of alchemy, and it just sounds like Ruby Rod to me. He's the grand master of the reiterated cycle. He's associated with communication and messages, so he like talks a mile a minute. He's broadcasting all the time. He's kind of our MC of the whole event. So he's the spirit that kind of oversees the whole process. He doesn't resolve contradictions, because that's sort of the philosopher's stone, but he embodies contradictions. So he's ambivalent, he's double-natured, he's paradoxical. So he's supposed to be androgynous, you know, he's feminine and masculine, he's hard and soft, he's anything contradictory that you can think of. He kind of embodies both at once. He carries a staff, which is the caduceus symbol, which, so Ruby's always got this rod, this magic rod that he's sort of carrying around. And the quote, this magic rod reconciles conflict and raises the soul to the temple of wisdom. And that's where we end up at the end, is this temple. And even he's associated with the symbol of the unicorn. So his kind of masculine side, he's got all these like phallic symbols of his unicorn hair and his big, you know, rod stick and everything. So I personally, I'm pretty convinced
the amulet too. If you take a look at the amulet, I think you'll like that.
So yeah, I'm pretty, again, like, is this the most sophisticated use of alchemical symbolism in the entire world? I don't think so. You know, probably John Donne and Shakespeare did it better, but I'm pretty sold for me on that. Like, this is, you know, an intentional symbol set kind of woven into the film. And if it's not, that's fine. It's there, and I see it. And obviously, like, I'm citing some of these other blogs and everything that, you know, some other people have noticed this as well. So all of this isn't coming from me. There's a few other blogs that you can go out and look at, and people have noticed this theme and looked at some of the images before. Anyway, that's my bid for meaning in the film, that it's
cool.
It's an alchemical wedding that results in pure love that defeats evil, and you know, a purification and unification, kind of spiritual ascension.
Three quick thoughts. One is that the picture you have there, the amulet on his neck, is the sort of vaginal symbol. You got the silver circlet around the ruby red at the center, so balances your thought there. Number two, what, you know, sex connected with death in literature? No, I mean, you can't.
Never.
Can't be there. The third, when you said alchemical, when just before we came on, I picked up my copy of The Alchemist, the graphic novel version, and it just kind of strikes me that the two priests are captured pretty well from the film, are captured pretty well in this. Oops. So there's one of that's Melchizedek, who's like a prophetic thing, and he looks like a bit like the Ian Holm character in the way that they're portraying it. And this one's harder, but this one. This alchemist there, who's actually making gold out of lead right there, looks pretty much like the priest at the beginning of the film. I don't know the actor's name, so I'm sure that's entirely coincidental, but it's actually probably more like, it's time to get, something epic that moves out of us. We have this imagination of what the alchemist kind of figure looks like, and so the priest works well as that sort of stand-in for the, wisdom, the bridge between those worlds or whatever, right? So,
right. And Devor's asking where the middle image comes from, and I think that's from the Ripley Scroll, which is which I actually saw. They had it at the New York Historical Society for the J.K. Rowling exhibit about a year ago, and they had a big, long 6 or 7 feet of it rolled out, and you could see it takes you in kind of step by step. It's a kind of how to make a philosopher's stone for the inquiring alchemist. So in case you're looking to turn your lead into gold.
Pay off some student loans.
Yeah, you can follow this quick and easy recipe and have that figured out for you. So
does it turn Dogecoin into Bitcoin though? One of the things I hadn't thought about it. I can't say I hadn't noticed it. I probably did too. But like you were talking about I like that phrase, the grandmaster of the reiterated cycle. That sounds very highfalutin. But like that's a great description of like commuting time, shock jock DJ type thing, which is exactly right. Like 5 p.m. it's time for Ruby Rod, right? Like that's exactly what, like 5 to 7 p.m. is which is a ridiculous time for an intergalactic radio show. Like, like why does that?
What time zone?
Yeah, exactly. What planet even? But no, I was thinking about it, and it's not just so it is reiterated, but it's also ubiquitous, right? Like, and I think as irritated as Korben Dallas is when he like meets Ruby Rod and his little like 1-word responses, he was listening to Ruby Rod in his apartment back when he's like finding out that he won this thing, this whatever. Now I guess we don't know. Does he always listen to Ruby? I mean, he's a taxi driver. He's probably listening to something in his car like all day, right? Does he listen to Ruby Rod like on the normal, daily basis? I don't know. I could almost see, like, I could see him being annoyed by him, but still listening to him at the same time. It's kind of that funny thing.
Right. I get the impression that like Ruby Rod, if he doesn't have a complete monopoly, it's like almost like I think you use the word ubiquitous, that like I don't know that Ruby Rod has a lot of competition out there, that he is he might just be the grandmaster in the sense that he is the official guy he's got this market cornered on what he does, and everybody listens to him whether or not they're even a fan. He's the one that's there, and he presides over everything, which is the kind of central idea of alchemical Mercury as a symbol.
And I realize we're not supposed to dig too deep into actually thinking about some of this stuff. But if the big evil ball of evil sucked up all the communication satellites, how the heck is he being broadcast across the universe?
Not just that, but the president's listening, and there's like no comment. It's like, no, shh, I never miss a show. right? I got 22 meetings after this. You know, like it's so like it's like it wouldn't surprise me if there's like 45 minutes of like unfinished tape or something somewhere, right? There's just like the show is it's 2.25 hours and it's so well, it's not quite that 2 full hours. It's so fast moving. It just you know, so but yeah, you know, but of course the voice from the sky is always important, right? Like so playing off the element that you're talking about, Kat, you know, and think of androids dreaming of electric sheep here with the, you know, the radio broadcasts, you know, from you know, the extraplanetary radio broadcasts that are coming by these, you know, robotic kind of perfect people or whatever, right? You know, it's kind of an interesting contrast in tone and all that kind of stuff that we have here. But that voice, like that Specfic does that, right? Like it uses the voice from the sky. You know, think of The Giver, you know, the voices that get announced over, you know, over the loudspeaker for the whole community, you know, control the whole thing. So these voices are important to listen to. This one, yeah,
it's almost self-aware though too. That's the great thing about him, is that like I think he's almost a perfect embodiment of the film itself within the film, right? Like through his whole period, the whole big crisis scene, you know, on the water planet, when throughout that whole incident with the gunfights and everything else, like he's doing his broadcast the whole time, and the whole event ends, and you know, what does he say? That was my greatest show ever, right? Like he's all about the spectacle, like throughout the whole incident there. That's all he could think about, is that he's you know, doing this performance on his show within the spectacle movie that we've already talked so much about. Even I think like he's like the perfect spectacle, like just talking about. I think he's almost the key to this movie, where like he's telling us we shouldn't take it too much too seriously, because he doesn't take himself that serious, right? Like in the most dangerous part of the film, you know, he's still aware that he's performing.
Yeah, like and so we don't know why the president's listening, and we don't know how he knows that the president's listening, so that he can give tips during the shootout with Bruce Willis, right? You know what I mean? Like it's just it's awesome. It occurs to me,
but that's like, again, he knows the president's listening because everybody's listening, right? Like he's the Grand Master.
Right, he just assumes.
I think that like
Korben Dallas is like stuck behind a planter or whatever it is, right at the bar. Like,
I know, but
who are we talking to right there?
Yes, but that's again where I feel like as soon as you do that, it falls apart. Whereas if you look at it in terms of what does he symbolize, like even it doesn't even have to be this alchemical stuff. It could just be what Dave is saying about he's a symbol of the movie within itself. That if you look at it that way, then I think it kind of works. It's when you try to make it work as an actual story with people that it starts to like the plot holes just become a little too big to ignore.
I've mentioned 12 Monkeys because I think the visual links are there, but actually think of, like, this is a weird one, but think of Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet from the same time period. Right. Actually, the colors, the use of costume, the contrast, the sort of gender fluidity, you know, the use of like ridiculousness. Now he's really tied to a script for the most part, but you know, it's kind of an intriguing visual overlap in my mind between those two films. So, but
well, and Ruby.
This is the Mercutio.
Ruby has a lot in common with the Harold Perrineau version of Mercutio, who
that's
also
it. Like,
mercurial, I think.
Yeah, that's right. This is a Mercutio, and of course, look at the staff, right? When you think of, you know, Mercury, and you look at the staff there, that's an intriguing kind of, and then of course the, you know, hermaphrodite, Hermes, messenger of the gods, right? Like there's kind of a few kind of interesting links that could be there, but Yeah, no, and of course, like maybe I'm just racist. I just made the connection between two black characters in two films within 2 years of each other is like the dynamic link, but it was actually kind of more the over the topness of it, right? The ambiguity of the character
Well,
and
and it's that. It's more what you said about like the gender bending and everything, like Mercutio in that movie coming out in drag singing, you know, like that's like the first like big party scene in the Baz Luhrmann Romeo and Juliet. Like
yeah.
it is there's a similar vibe going on. And apparently Luc Besson wanted Prince for this
Oh
role.
yeah, sure. Yeah,
And it didn't work out, but like, which doesn't surprise me because even when I was thinking about how to describe this character, it was like, well, it's kind of Prince-like in some ways.
sure.
So you can kind of still see the traces of that here, I think. This
Yeah,
is
it might be.
this is like the Gary Oldman performance where I know some people don't like it, and it's like, I think it's great. I don't know if you don't like Chris Tucker in this movie, I feel like maybe this movie isn't right for you. You know, like if he is the symbol of the movie within the movie, um, this is the kind of litmus test of are you on the right wavelength or not?
I think I'm on the wrong wavelength. I like, yeah, Kat, I will take the rebuke. I'm just not quite there. It's not that I don't get what he's doing. I just found it a bit. I liked it better when like his life was in danger, right? Like it was just I found the montage scenes just a bit long
Hmm.
and um but I have to say one of the TV editions I saw once upon a time, some of that is cut, and actually I liked his character when it's cut together. But like Mercutio with the Romeo and Juliet version, I also like there's masculinity, but then there's this kind of weird drag, and then there's this hyper confidence combined with this sudden doubt, like this doubt
Hmm.
that hops immediately to the front. So this character grows on me. The second time I like it better than the first, like this week. But yeah, no, I like Milla Jovovich. I like her
Hmm.
character. So that's kind of for me and Bruce Willis being kind of little boy is kind of, I kind of like that. So yeah. Sorry.
And it sounds like Devorah agrees with you. She says some people are better enjoyed from a distance, which I think is a reference to Korben Dallas listening from afar to
Yeah.
Ruby
Yeah.
Rod rather than being up close and personal.
Yeah.
I think we can all agree with that sentiment.
It's nothing if not loud, that's for sure.
All right, so we've got like 20 minutes left here, which is kind of surprising. I wasn't sure if we were going to make the whole 2 hours on this film, but I think we're going to do it. Dave, I don't know if this goes back to talking about the capitalism thing or not at all, but you had some comments here around sort of the broken glass fallacy, if we can call it that.
Yeah, I feel like we probably touched on this already somewhat. If there was or is some attempt to make a conscious political statement in the narrative, I think it's probably a good chance you find it somewhere in this scene here with Zorg, where he gives his big monologue about the creating a little destruction and how he's helping society by doing this and so on. And I like this for a couple of reasons. Number one, this is my favorite shot in the film, and everybody please enjoy my GIF over and over again. Look at his hand like through the glass. Like, what an excellent shot. This is my absolute favorite part of the movie is this shot. But another thing I found interesting about Zorg's monologue here is, and I don't know if this is intentional or not, I think possibly because of for cultural reasons, but the argument that Zorg makes is made by a French economist, Frédéric Bastiat, and in economics it's called the broken window fallacy. The idea being that you're encouraging economic growth by breaking windows, right? And then because now I've got to pay somebody to fix the window, and now that guy has a job, and et cetera, et cetera. The fallacy being the opportunity costs, right? What Bastiat calls the unseen, right? Like the productivity that went into fixing that window was going to go somewhere else, and it didn't because of the broken window, right?
Nice.
And what I found interesting about this is that Luc Besson does not make that argument, right? Like, maybe it's coincidental that he restates the Bastiat argument about the broken window, but the solution that he gives, the idea of like how love conquers all, or however you want to define it, like, is entirely not the solution that Bastiat gives, which is interesting. So either it's totally coincidental and there is no message in this film, which kind of seems to be the the consensus from the panel, or
So that's the most likely one. But
right?
What else?
Yeah. But that was my little spiel on Bastiat and the broken window.
Yeah, that was gorgeous. Thanks, Dave. It's a beautiful shot. And I think that the economic theory was sort of a critique of when Keynesian economics gets normalized into, economic policy or something. I wouldn't have gone there in 100 years. Yeah, that's pretty cool. But the broken window, broken glass is kind of it's just hard to imagine some of these being coincidences, but I'll address that in a few minutes, I think.
So am I understanding the theory right, or does it depend on who's making the argument? Is it both, or is there a distinguishment? That's not a word.
Sure.
Distinction.
That's a word.
Between the beauty of the destruction itself, like the broken glass itself, like even just the little ellipses you have in the quote, where what you don't have in the quote here is when he goes on to say that what's beautiful about it is all the jobs that the things have to do, that the things come out and clean it up. And that's his argument, is that I'm supporting life by giving people work. Whereas like, I feel like the way you have the quote is how I always initially understand his point until he gets to that part. Initially, it kind of seems as though he's saying that the destruction itself is inherently beautiful. And there's something about the play of what does he say? The ballet of form and color that doesn't even depend on the industry of the machines that clean up the mess. It's just the broken glass itself. Is there a distinction between that in the argument, or do you think it's the same thing?
No, I think that's a great distinction, and I think it ties to the movie better, right? That Zorg, I definitely could read his Gary Oldman's performance as keying on exactly what you're saying, like the form and the color, like that Zorg's real appreciation is with the form and the color, like the chaos that he's created, right, and how lovely that is, and the making the jobs thing is kind of his societal justification.
Right.
I certainly could read that in Oldman's performance. I think that works a lot better with the film than the economic argument does. From an economic perspective, that's not really what Bastiat was talking about. He was making pretty much a utilitarian argument. There is a related concept in economics called the creative destruction that was popularized by this guy named Joseph Schumpeter. That does talk more about the value of destruction, right? Where the general argument being that like new companies come up in order to displace old slow companies, and so they're causing destruction by overturning these large companies, but they're doing it in a creative way that creates new opportunities, new technologies, new things, and all of that. Doesn't really seem like that's where Zorg's going with it, but it's interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, it's interesting how, because like you pointed out, Kat, like there's ellipses in here. It doesn't go through his whole actual monologue, which is quite a bit longer. And when it starts out, like, it's interesting how it shifts from the beginning to the end, because when it starts out, you kind of almost get the sense of like the primordial soup kind of thing, like life emerged out of this chaotic, destructive environment, and like sort of came out of that. And that's kind of what he's perpetuating. But then it gets into, but then it kind of shifts to this like, by destroying things, we're giving people or robots or whatever, we're the robots come out and clean this stuff up, and then there's someone who's making the robots, and kind of there's this like chain of economic or whatever activity that's like supporting all these lives. Like by breaking this glass, I'm supporting the livelihoods of millions of people down the chain, which is kind of the classical economic argument, as I understand it. It's a lot of the like, this hurricane will spur so much economic, whatever, because now the government can come in and pay for stimulus to like help the region, or provide funds and this and that. And it's like, well, it might have been better for there not to have been a hurricane that destroyed a bunch of stuff in the first place, but either whatever, or for a man-made example, it'd be like war. It's like, so yes, there was destruction, but now like we can rebuild, and all this. It's like, well, maybe we should have just blown a bunch of stuff up in the first place.
Actually, can I speak to that?
Yeah,
no, like I actually think that Kat was sort of onto something. I actually think he's responding to Saint Augustine. Okay, so this is the longest speech in the script, right? So this is the longest monologue in the script. There are other kind of speechy moments, but like there are two moments where evil is not simply like a lack of something good happening, but an active force, and then a third one that's attention, right? So remember the big evil bag of evil, or whatever it's called, evil ball of evil, right? Like that's when you do evil to it, evil grows. So this is not privation. This is not evil happening because good is absent, but active evil creates and breeds something new that's even eviler than what was there before. And here destruction is beautiful, right? These are the two things. And then Leeloo's going to ask the question, do humans always create in order to make destruction out of creation? And so it's actually kind of a critical moment. The question of whether destruction is beautiful, whether evil is active, is really kind of an essential question in the film. So I think that's not a bad kind of turn on this glass moment, which I'm getting a little dizzy watching. I'm trying to watch like the blue light at the top of my screen.
I don't know if this one will be better.
No, it's a little better. Depending how long we spend on this screen. But yeah, so but again, like I don't know that Luc Besson is saying, Augustine, you bastard, I'm coming after you, or that he's actually trying to reinterpret it and say that whatever anybody thinks, evil's not active and destructive in a thing itself, but actually is anti-love. I don't know that we even quite go that far. So
it is because like we can it's interesting how we can take like some of these ideas and certainly apply them. Like, was he thinking of Augustine? Was he thinking of Basquiat? Was he thinking of the classical alchemical symbolism?
Yeah.
Or was he just taking like things that he kind of knows about through other references and pop culture and whatever? And I mean, maybe it doesn't matter, because like maybe those ideas are just strong enough that you don't have to have the original source to still kind of be responding to it, or responding to how it's presented in a pop culture sense. But I think definitely.
Can we skip? Like, I think we should end with this because it's kind of a fun thing, and go here, which is the same question. And what struck me was, and we get this. Remember Buffy at the end of season 5, jumps off in a very cruciform
way. That is your gift.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's like it's grace, it's substitution. We think it's a descent into hell, right? The harrowing of hell, like Christ on Saturday or something. It's not, but well, shoot, sorry if you haven't seen that far. But anyway, it's been 20 years. You should pick it up. So like, that's right. It parallels so well that Christ moment. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, watch the podcast or listen to the podcast. And so you can tell us the episode in the show notes here. But it's sort of intriguing. So we have like this, we have a number of cruciform moments, right? We have, Leeloo here who, has this kind of surrender kind of moment. And then she leaps off the building. Do I have that picture next? I've actually forgotten yeah. So she leaps off the building in the same kind of cruciform way. And so it kind of led me to think about, what do we have here? And actually, Kat's already drawn out. Well, death and resurrection is kind of all throughout this film, including her. She's, there's a literal death of her and a resurrection through technology, right? A recreation of her DNA, and there's sort of death and resurrection moments all the way through. Like even like in inconsistencies, like Korben accidentally freezes these people from the government, right? So like you've got government dying at the same moment that Leeloo's being baptized just above, right? While the priest is in the room, going into the coffin. Like there's just a lot. Like there's coffins all over the place. They sleep in coffins. They arise from coffins. It's death and resurrection images are all the way through. And so when that happens, you're looking for different motifs. Is there a Christ motif? Does someone die to save others? And I think that's an essential kind of question. And here you've got the question of good versus evil, which is at the biggest scope possible in this case, but also the question of what it means to be human. And that's like I'm amazed at kind of like when I actually stopped and listened to the film, which I know you're not really supposed to do, we discovered, but and listen to the film, like the question of what it means to be humans all throughout. If you go to the next slide here, we have the this great moment, humans act so strange. What do you mean? Well, everything you create's used to destroy. Well, we call it human nature. That's actually kind of an astute, an astute definition of human nature from like a historical theological perspective, which I presume that Bruce Willis hasn't spent a lot of time in seminary, and Luc Besson either, right? And what did you? She's up to the letter V, with V being kind of an important sci-fi letter anyway. But V is good. Valiant, vulnerable. He runs out of words, right? That's how quickly like he. But the priest's first name is Vito, right? Life, right? It exists throughout, but there's all these kind of like a human shape. So all through the script, there's these notes about humans, sometimes capitalized. Something happens in a human shape, they look like humans, that sort of thing. Humans have 40 DNA MIMO groups. I don't know if that's true. She has 200,000 stuff, the perfection thing that you mentioned. The Guardians never really trusted the human race. And then that great moment we saw above where the police ask Korben, are you classified as human? And he says, negative, I am a meat puppet, right? A meat popsicle, right? Which is such a great kind of answer there. And then the priest, sitting in the bar trying to drink, but he's not very good at it, saying, she's made to be strong, but she's so fragile, so human, right? And then in the original script, the diva, which is such an interesting, strange character, says the same thing when she's dying. And there's a few kind of other examples, but then there's also these other things like you're a monster. That's the phrase is used a couple of times to kind of contradict, right? And so it's kind of a neat thing. If you go to the next slide, which I don't think we should talk about love because we're kind of out of time, in this this great last scene is again cruciform scene, right? She bends over and the light kind of comes out of her and saves the world and stuff. But, in the script it says, I don't know love. I'm like a machine programmed to save other people's lives, but never to have one of my own. A really kind of intriguing moment, machine versus humanity. And then in the film edition, I don't know love. I don't know love. I was built to protect, not to love. There's no use for me in anything other than this. So there's a little shift there, but kind of a human, non-human question. And so I was thinking about this. Well, like, I'm pretty sure he's not slipping in Sunday school lessons, right? We get that. And I was talking about the last Marvel film, where a whole bunch of people die, not everybody, but a bunch of people die. And it's this huge mammoth thing. And I was talking about kind of the self-sacrifice and I was with a European and I talked about cruciform, the shape of the cross. And he called me Eurocentric, which was, I thought, ironic given I'm Canadian and he was European. And then I said, well, Jesus is Asian, and like it just never occurred to him before, and it became this really weird moment for me and him. I think he was like, I just went to the movies, and I've been thinking about this, and I've come to think there's sort of an emergent theory that we have to really consider, which is that I don't think, like, I think this film is almost one better read through culture. C.S. Lewis said this in Allegory of Love. I'm going to read through a bunch of books that you probably haven't read, but you should have read. But we're going to not just read the text, we're going to read through the text to the culture behind the text. And I think that this film is great for bringing all these things that exist deep within our cultural memory, deep within our cultural ethos out to the front, and then playing with them and just batting them around like tennis balls and stuff like that. And I think he wants to dive into something mythic. He really wanted to make a film that has this kind of mythic element, and he tried to do that with the cool tattoos and the symbols, right? Really neat, simple symbology that was used there. The alchemical stuff is kind of peppered through, the Egyptology stuff, aliens. He wanted to do it that way, but I think he's actually better at doing it in this way. The Christ myth that comes up as the center of our Western understanding of what it means to love, which is to give our life away for the sake of someone else. I think that's a kind of a neat thing. So that's my thought, is this film keeps coming up with these kind of interesting things because they emerge, like he just allows them to speak. And so this film isn't just a looking glass in the sense that it's a mirror of what us four people are thinking and a few dozen others, but actually are looking through to something that exists beneath that. So that's my theory. I think that's why the economic stuff sounds intelligent, and the alchemical stuff sounds intelligent, and the design stuff sounds intelligent. I think the film references are real, like he's really referring to other texts and films. That's obviously there, but I think that's the same kind of thing. So that's my theory. That's my thought, that this is a great film for culture.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was trying to get at when I kind of said I think this is sort of like a pop version of a lot of these things, that whether or not Luc Besson may or may not have looked at those specific economists, theorists, he probably, I would guess, hasn't read Augustine, directly. Maybe he has, I don't know. But that doesn't mean that he's not engaging with these theories, because they are so pervasive in our culture. Like, I think there are plenty of works out there that are engaging with religious and mystical and economic symbolism and theory without necessarily having gone to the original sources, that they're engaging with secondary sources, that they've encountered these ideas in other people's books and films, or it's just in the air, and these are ideas that we all share, even if we don't necessarily know where we got them. And maybe that's selling him short. He might be much more intentional and well-read than we're giving him credit for.
I think he really needs to read Charles Williams' Place of the Lion, Luc Besson, and here's why. Right, what you have at the center of this is a brilliant medieval scholar who keeps playing with archetypal imagery, but she doesn't believe it, and then all of a sudden those archetypes come true into real life around them, and then she doesn't have the resources to combat them because she has never taken them seriously. And I think that's a pretty good definition of his career in this Me Too movement, right? He's played with what it means to be a human, with what it means to be a woman, with how women and men relate, with gender and power and all these dynamics. He's played with them as if they're toys, but they're actually our stories. And now these stories come up because he didn't, like, I don't know him personally, maybe everything is wrong, but like, if these women's stories are true, like, he didn't integrate the question into his life, right? Which is that there is dignity, in otherness and individuality and that kind of thing. And so he played with these. Now, it's true, a pterodactyl didn't come down and try and eat him, in Brooklyn, like in The Place of the Lion, but I'm not saying it won't happen. I think a Twitter version of pterodactyl has come after Luc Besson.
I think a more satisfying movie would not just play with the symbols of these different ideas, but really take them very seriously and engage with them. Without, I think you could, when I say serious, I don't mean losing all of the humor and the wit and the charm of what we're talking about here. But yeah, I think that's a really good real world application of this. From all appearances, Luc Besson is extremely interested in women and what it means to be a woman in the world. Well, in that way, but like as a subject for a film. But yeah, like to what extent he's actually incorporated that thoughtfulness, or maybe there's a lack of thoughtfulness, which is betrayed in some of his approaches here. So I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah, and in the end, it's kind of interesting. She is not the fifth element, right? Love is the fifth element, right? Like right. It's I think one of the feminist critiques that I read, is that Korben's the man god, strong male, and she's the infantile female. I don't know, like when we get to the language bit, I mean, I love the way that she spoke that language. I love childlike characters, whether they're boys or girls. This is a woman. Well, she's only a few days old, I guess, or a couple days old, but or a few eons old or whatever, same thing. And time doesn't matter, right? So like, I love that. And in the end, like, does he win by like shooting people? Like in the end, like, what is one of the V words that's really important for him? Valiant, yes. And what's the other V word? Vulnerable.
Vulnerable, yeah.
It's a really important subversion. I think it's really neat. I don't think he took it quite as seriously as he allowed the myth to kind of emerge out. Anyway, with Luke, if you're watching, thanks for the film. Give me a call. We'll talk about it. I'll buy you lunch.
Check out Charles Williams.
Yeah, and I'll buy you a copy of Charles Williams' Place the Line if you can't come to PEI for lunch. So. Yeah.
Obviously, I mean, it could be easy to do the cryptic thing and try to, guess what he does know or didn't know. I mean, who knows? It's France. Maybe they teach Basquiat way more than they do in the U.S., right? Like,
it's France. Of course, it's anti-capitalist. He's French.
I mean, who knows? But on the other hand, I don't think this is like the set of The Matrix where the Wachowskis are like forcing everyone to read Simulacra and Simulation, because like this is an important philosophical work, that. Right, exactly. So, there's ranges of whatever, but no, I think you make a really good point, Brenton, about this being, however he ran across the ideas, whether it was from the original, text. Classical language of Augustine or not, or just bubbling up through sort of the symbolism in culture. I mean, clearly there's enough here that seems deliberate, however that happened, and then enough that even if he is just sort of referencing other movies and things as part of the pop culture, like you said, and still worth looking at from that perspective. We're a minute or two over our time, but we should talk about language because
even like I love when she's like, I don't know, you guys, like, we actually have a linguist here in the panel, at least one linguist. I don't know what Curtis and Kat can do, but like I just love hearing her talk. Like she's so emotive as she talks. And I heard that they emailed her something back and forth in the language. I can't remember what I heard about that. The director and Milla Jovovich, but like she's so like, like I don't know, like I'm just like, oh, I like you, like she's just like, there's a lot of energy in that. It doesn't sound to me like the mythic language that's the voice of the entire universe, the creative element of language and idea. Granted, I would expect something with more gutturals, but I guess I have Hebrew in my mind. But like or at least an Elven kind of tongue. But like it's at least Elvish, right? It's light and the L's and R's, and she's kind of, anyway. Sorry, you guys go ahead. I'm just gonna enjoy what you have to say because for me it was just fun, so.
No, I would agree with all of that. I tried to pull up as much kind of information because I figured our audience would be interested in this sort of thing. So the few bits and pieces that I did pull up, number one, I found it interesting that Milla, I read, can speak 4 languages. So I think she brought a lot of the to the table as well in terms of making that feel natural and sound natural in the film. Reportedly, Besson had put together a small dictionary, a lexicon of words. I think grammatically, it's very close to like a calque of French, with a lot of mixed words from all sorts of languages, some of which, you know, Jovovich could speak or whatever, and so they tried to make it as natural sounding as possible by doing that. There was a small lexicon that was printed in a book in '97, in the same year as the film, called The Story of the Fifth Element, where Besson talks a little bit about that, about how he and Jovovich playfully communicated with the language during production and had a lot of fun with it. There's a small lexicon that he prints there, and A Small Community Sense has kind of elaborated on that, expanded, reconstructed the grammar based on the early scripts and dialogue from the movie, and material that Besson had printed in this book. And so there's a couple of small fan communities that you can find online, and a self-published book of the reconstruction, primarily from this fan, Leah Fair, but very much a fan collaborative effort to reconstruct as much as they could from the small bits and pieces that come down to us. So interesting little conlang.
Cool.
The conlang folks never fail, do they?
No. Very dedicated.
Yeah.
Real conlangers don't fail. But we've all read lots of books and saw films where the language was just for atmosphere.
Sure.
Right. Like
No,
if this...
and by that I meant the fans, in the sense of, if you give them something to latch onto, they are gonna get what they can out of it. So I mean, and I think Dave is by far the most equipped to talk about this. So from my purely untrained ear, I feel like that's, again, part of what I was talking about, of just how Milla turns something that could have been not that great into something really special, and her facility with the language is part of it, that it does feel very natural. It feels very lived in. It feels, and I don't know what I'm basing that on other than just my ear. That sounds like she knows, like, whether or not it's consistent, I can't say, but I believe her when she's speaking it. I believe that she knows what she's saying. So she really sells it, I guess. So it doesn't surprise me to hear that they did work out some basics, because it doesn't have that feeling of shallowness that a lot of kind of fake languages have.
Devorah is asking the name of the book, and there's 2 of them, right? So there's the Story of the Fifth Element, which is where the original lexicon, or a portion of it, was published, and then there was a book called Divinian, which is the reconstructed guide.
I think she might have put that in before. I think she might have been asking about The Place of the Lion. I think she put that in back when we were on Charles Williams. So
that's a Charles Williams book. I don't know that that's the first Charles Williams book that you should read. It's the first one C.S. Lewis and all his friends read, J.R. Tolkien and them. But I would start with Descent into Hell, then do the Arthurian one, then go to Place of the Lion. But yeah, it's Place of the Lion, and maybe his one of his better pieces of fiction. But it's weird. It's a weird book. It's a hard book. Yeah.
War in Heaven. I think that's the most accessible.
Oh, you think it's the most accessible?
I think, yeah, the Arthurian one, but that's me.
Oh yeah, no, the Arthurian one totally is the most accessible. Shadows of Ecstasy is sort of darker, but pretty easy to romp with. But yeah, Place of the Lion. But this
I think I started with All Hallows Eve, so I'm completely off all of your recommendations.
All Hallows Eve is a good book. Yeah, I think.
I have never read anything.
Yeah, no, it's okay. You're okay. Yeah, you'll be fine.
Dave doesn't think so. He's disappointed in me. On that note, sounds like we should have a Signum symposium though on Charles Williams.
I would love to. I've been kind of playing with screenplays, and one I would like to do is Charles Williams' screenplay, A Descent into Hell, which is a play within a book, within a story, and I want to add the third layer of Charles Williams' life because it's pretty weird and a little disturbing, and so I want to have the three elements throughout the film. So, but you know, I call Benedict Cumberbatch like every 3 weeks, and he just never calls me back. So
maybe someday, and if he ever does and makes a movie, and we can talk about it here.
That's it, right? He has made some movies.
I mean, on that topic, of course.
Yeah. If there's a film out of Britain that he's not in, then we'll talk about that one too, right? So.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you all for joining us. Don't forget to come see us again when we talk about Solaris next month. And until then, have a great time. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. That was fun.
Thank you.